Hey everybody, welcome back to World History. Today is our last section of notes for this chapter, so your notes will be due today at the end of this video. Please go ahead and get your notes out and let's get started. So, a little bit on the war's aftermath. 50 million people died around the world. In Europe, that number was about 30 million. Over half of that number were civilians. The Soviet Union experienced over 20 million in casualties. And this kind of brings to light one of the many quotes of Hitler: "Give me 10 years and you will not be able to recognize Germany." Well, you definitely couldn't recognize it now. The total war left many cities in ruin, including Paris, London, Moscow, Berlin, and so many others. So the horrors of the Holocaust, which we've talked about, were not fully realized until after the war, when the camps were being liberated. And war crimes trials were put into place, especially for the charge of crimes against humanity. It's in the site of Nuremberg, the site of the Nazi war crime trials. We still have some going on today. They put on a 99-year-old former Nazi nurse on trial last year. They had to transport her back and forth from her nursing home. This showed leaders could be held accountable for their actions in wartime. We're also going to see occupying of these spaces by the Allies. The U.S. is going to strengthen democracy and would ensure tolerance and peace, specifically in Germany and Japan. New constitutions, the power of the people. Japan specifically would be overseen by Douglas MacArthur to a bit of a more militaristic extent. Not like what we've been talking about in previous chapters and stuff, but a little bit more strict. So from this, we have the United Nations being established. This is essentially replacing the League of Nations. This is an international governing body. And within the General Assembly, each country has one vote. And there's also the Security Council, which has 5 main members and the rest are rotating. The 5 standing members are the US, Soviet Union, aka Russia, Britain, France, and China. They have the authority to ensure peace, and those 5, only those 5, have the power to veto any council decision. But beyond the peacekeeping efforts that the UN goes with, they also helped end disease, education. They don't help to end education. They help spread education, help refugees, work on economic development. You have the WHO, or the World Health Organization. They also help with food and agricultural organizations around the world. Now, eventually, the alliance is going to begin to break apart. The US and the Soviet Union especially are going to emerge as new world powers. And we're going to abandon our traditional isolation to counter the communist threat. And the differences begin to grow between the allies. Again, remember, the Nazis have been the common enemy. You know, the whole enemy of my enemy is my friend. And the governments of Eastern Europe countries were divided. This leads into the Cold War, a state of tension and a hostility between nations aligned with the US on one side and the Soviet Union on the other, without armed conflict between the major rivals. We'll talk a lot more about the Cold War next chapter. So the Cold War is going to begin, and Stalin's goals were to spread communism to Eastern Europe. And by 1948, pro-Soviet Union communist governments were in place in all of these countries. Now, it was also supposed to create a buffer zone against Germany. Now, you're going to see them take over like Poland and Czechoslovakia and Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. All these places would eventually at some point be either aligned with the Soviet Union for its entire time, or a satellite state that was technically under the control of the Soviet Union, or temporarily a part of the Soviet Union until 1948 or 1960. So a new conflict is going to develop as we see the Truman Doctrine being passed by President Truman. This was the U.S. policy to contain the spread of communism through the idea known as containment, essentially limiting communism to where it already exists. This will guide U.S. foreign policy for decades. And also, in a way to try and subvert communism, we also have the Marshall Plan, a massive aid package with food and economic assistance to Europe to help countries rebuild. This was mainly to help strengthen democratic governments. The Soviet Union is going to refuse any of this aid and didn't allow Eastern European countries to accept that aid either. So Germany is going to stay divided Western leaders wanted Germany's economy to recover to restore political stability. And eventually, the British, French, and U.S. zones of Germany are all going to unite into West Germany, The Soviet Union is going to be furious by this and deny further reparations and dug into Eastern Germany, where Berlin is. But since Berlin's the capital, Berlin is also broken up into these zones as well. So in East Germany, which was socialist, you had this major section of Berlin that was democratic and free. Now, in Western Germany, it was very common for it to be democratic. People would write a constitution and have self-government, versus in the East, where Stalin controlled with socialist dictatorship. Like I said, Berlin would be split into East and West, and West Berlin would be used to escape communism in Eastern Europe. Stalin wanted to stop this by forcing Western powers to abandon West Berlin, but that's not going to happen. As a result, Stalin's going to put up a blockade stopping supplies from getting in. So Allied cargo planes just decided, you know what? We're going to supply West Berlin with food and fuel by throwing it out the back of the plane. And the West is going to win this as the crisis begins to deepen. So, as we wrap this up, we have two major opposing alliances to talk about. We have the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. This is a military alliance composing of US, France, the UK, Italy, Canada, Netherlands, Belgium, Norway, Denmark, Portugal, Luxembourg, and Iceland, versus the Warsaw Pact, which was the Soviets' response. This included the Soviet Union, Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, and Romania. These are the satellite states that were under heavy political, economic, and military influence from the Soviet Union. They were used to keep the other Eastern European countries in line. But that's going to define a lot of where we're going from here. So it also became a propaganda war. The US would defend capitalism and democracy, while the Soviet Union claimed that they were on the moral high ground against Western imperialism, both of which being a major world power. And we can see this played out in multiple movies, including Rocky IV, Miracle on Ice, Red Dawn, GoldenEye, and so many others. And that is actually it for notes for this chapter. So your assignment for today is the Sheg Cold War packet that is on Google Classroom. Also make sure you turn in your notes. I'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.